Okay, so we're going to go into Canvas, back to Canvas. So anyway, yeah, what I was saying is last week we were looking at structure and we were talking about like the physical structure of a poem, and what a poem looks like is gonna be different just depending on the poem. So we were able to chunk Baca's poem by one stanza and one line. That would be a whole chunk. And so different poems are going to obviously look different. But today we're going to continue on with the poetry skills, and we're going to specifically talk about contrasts. And contrast still falls under the banner of structure, but this is more about the structure of ideas. And so you still have to go through that thinking process to be able to identify the ideas in a poem. But then when you start looking at relationships between ideas, contrasts is a way to structure the ideas in a poem, is to set opposites side by side, or things that don't have, what seemingly don't have any similarities, and then you set them side by side, and it emphasizes either the stark differences or it emphasizes like an unusual similarity that maybe you hadn't seen before. So yeah, so this still falls under the structure section of your poetry handout, but it's more related to the structure of ideas. So in your OneNote, I'm just going to go over to the handouts, and I'm looking at the poetry skills sheet, and I'm looking at the structure section in the poetry skills sheet, sorry. And it says structure, just the overall structure is the arrangement, go away, the arrangement of parts in sections of a text, also the relationships of the parts to each other, and the sequence in which the text reveals information. These are all structural choices. So one, you need to be able to explain the function of the structure in a text. So function meaning job. What job did the structure do in this poem? And then I give you ideas about where to look, and we talked about this in the last videos, but you can look in the line and stanza breaks to see how the structure is broken up. And then the arrangement. So it's not just breaking it up, but it's like, why did that part come first? How does that lead into the second? How are those related? So that's part of structure. And then a text structure can affect the reader's reactions and expectations by presenting relationships among the ideas through their positions. And this is a little bit repetitive, but this is how we were dealing with structure. So we're going to add on contrasts. So you should be able to explain the contrast, like the function, the job. What did that contrast do? So where would we look? A contrast can be introduced through the focus. And by focus, it just is really meaning like, what's the main idea? What is the writer having you look at or focus on? Also, to understand the job of contrast, you can look at tone. So is there one tone in a stanza and then another tone in like the next stanza, and they're contrasting? So is one tone sad and the next happy? Or is one tone sarcastic and the next is genuine? So tone is another thing we could look for. Point of view is another way to identify or notice contrast. Is the first stanza one narrator, and then the second stanza a second narrator, and are they having a conversation? And so point of view can be used to demonstrate contrast. Characters, narrating, speaker or perspective, and these are all they kind of cross over. And then dramatic situation or the moment. So there may be two different situations happening inside of a poem. We could also look for settings, time. One stanza might be in the past, one might be present. They might use contrasting imagery. And then contrasts are the result of shifts or juxtaposition or both. And so a shift, it tells you right here, a shift can be, a shift is a change, some kind of change. And you might have, kind of the same thing going on, and then all of a sudden it sounds differently. So like with Jimmy Santiago Baca's poem, the first two stanzas were like 6 and 5 lines, and it's very similar in its structure. And then you get to the third stanza, and he wasn't saying anything different about love, but he was saying more. And so he went into more depth in the third stanza, and there was 9 lines. And so there was a shift there. And that was just kind of a slight shift. But then after that stanza, there was a big shift between how Baca was talking about love in the first 3 stanzas and how he talks about love in the 4th stanza, because in the 4th stanza, he's not using metaphors really anymore. He's really talking about love. And so those shifts that could be shifts of focus, shifts of tone, shifts of point of view, all those things are signals that there's probably a contrast. And then shifts can emphasize contrast between segments, between sections. So that's what we're looking at today, is specifically contrasts. So in your OneNote, I have shared the poem called Theme for English B by Langston Hughes. It's under class notes, and so you're going to want to annotate this poem as well. And so you're going to have a writing assignment about it. So you're going to want to take notes. Sorry, I was double checking. I can't remember if I posted an assignment. I did it yesterday. Yeah. Okay. So we're going to look at, you should be going to OneNote to find Theme for English B by Langston Hughes. And I am trying to get into my desktop, my document camera. See if it like tries to ruin my day or not. Oh, good. Okay. So I'm going to change my presentation style. Stop. Start. Okay, so I think you guys should see the document camera page and maybe me. Does that sound right? Does that look right? Sorry, I disappeared. Is that what it looks like? Document camera with the poem and me talking. Is that what you guys see? I just want to make sure you guys can see the poem. Great. Thanks, Osvaldo. Okay, so we're going to look at this poem, and we're still dealing with structure. And ideally, what's supposed to happen is as we go through these skills, you don't abandon them. You take them with you every time you read a poem. So we're still looking at structure, but even if we were looking at, let's say, figurative language, we still want to use our skills of dealing with structure to help us understand what's going on. That's the point of doing this. So I'm still going to go through and chunk this out. So already, without having read it, I'm looking at, this is its kind of own little chunk, because one, it's set aside, it's in text. And so I'm looking at it. It says the instructor said, and so this is probably dialogue. So I'm going to chunk that on its own with the first line. Sorry, I'm going to need more space than that. And then this is a long stanza. Then we've got a short stanza, then a long stanza. Let's see, are these apart? This is its own, and this is its own. So far, this looks reasonable, just chunking it out stanza by stanza. There's a few little weird parts, like with this line. It's a little hard to see if it's supposed to be with that stanza. That's why we read it. And then we have this line back here that may belong with that chunk. We'll see when we get there. Leave this like this. Okay, so just like last time dealing with structure, we're going to chunk it out. So we did that. And we have maybe a few questions. I have a few questions. This is a cold read, just like you guys are doing. So this is how I would work through it. So I'm going to read the poem now, and then I'm going to go chunk by chunk and see what the main ideas are going on in each section. Okay. So it's called Theme for English B. The instructor said, "Go home and write a page tonight and let that page come out of you. Then it will be true." I wonder if it's that simple. I'm 22, colored, born in Winston-Salem. I went to school there, then Durham, then here to this college on the hill above Harlem. I'm the only colored student in my class. The steps from the hill lead down into Harlem. Through the park, then I cross St. Nicholas, 8th Avenue, 7th, and I come to the Y, the Harlem Branch Y, where I take the elevator up to my room, sit down, and write this page. It's not easy to know what is true for you or me at 22, my age, but I guess I'm what I feel and see and hear. Harlem, I hear you. Hear me. We two, you, me, talk on this page. I hear New York too. Me? Who? Well, I like to eat, sleep, drink, and be in love. I like to work, read, learn, and understand life. I like a pipe for a Christmas present. Or records. Bessie, Bop, or Bach. I guess being colored doesn't make me not like the same things other folks like who are other races. So will my page be colored that I write? Being me, it will not be white, but it will be a part of you, instructor. You are white, yet a part of me as I am a part of you. That's American. Sometimes, perhaps, you don't want to be a part of me, nor do I often want to be a part of you. But we are. That's true. As I learn from you, I guess you learn from me, although you're older and white and somewhat more free. This is my page for English B. Okay. So, just off the bat, if we were going to talk about contrasts, what's the main contrast here? Should be pretty obvious. What's the main contrast? Do you need a clue? It's color related. So we've got a contrast of white versus black. And it's a contrast. So usually the point of a contrast is to emphasize just some idea. So we really can't know until we start breaking this up and figure out what's really going on with this. So the first chunk, the instructor said, "Go home and write a page tonight and let that page come out of you. Then it will be true." So I'm thinking like maybe something like, I'm going to say the heart. What comes from the heart? Oops. So I wrote down what comes from the heart will be truth. Okay, so this is an overlying idea. And so we should wonder if what he writes is truth. So the next stanza, he wonders, is it that simple? Like just to write a page and it be from the heart and that be true. I wonder if it's that simple. I am 22, colored, born in Winston-Salem. I went to school there, then Durham, then here to this college on the hill above Harlem. I'm the only colored student in my class. The steps from the hill lead down into Harlem, through a park. Then I cross St. Nicholas, 8th Avenue, 7th, and I come to the Y, the Harlem branch Y, where I take the elevator up to my room, sit down, and write this page. So in this long paragraph or stanza, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. We've got 10 lines here. And I think that there is a shift in here. There's a change of kind of focus, I would say. He says, I wonder if it's that simple. I am 22, colored, born in Winston-Salem, went to school there, then Durham, then here, to this college on the hill above Harlem. I'm the only colored student in class. There's a shift right here. Because then he says, the steps from the hill lead down into Harlem through a park. Then I cross St. Nicholas, 8th Avenue, 7th, and I come to the Y, the Harlem branch Y, where I take the elevator up to my room, sit down, and write this page. So this is about the narrator, and this is about the distance the narrator travels for school. So he tells a little bit about himself. I'm the only colored person in class. And then there's a shift. This is all the like stops, all the things he has to go through the journey just to get to school. And this even does it up here a little bit. He was born in Winston-Salem. He went to school, then to Durham, then to here, to this college. So he has his own journey. So there's some similarities, but there is a shift in focus. And then we get to, it's not easy to know what is true for you or me at 22, my age. But I guess I'm what I feel and see and hear. Harlem, I hear you. Hear you. Hear me. We two, you, me, talk on this page. I hear you too, New York. Me? Who? So this is a little strange, right? So when you deal with a section and you're like, I'm not totally sure what's going on here, just start getting smaller. Where does it start? Where does it get weird? Where does it stop? So he's questioning truth. Let's see, it's not easy to know what is true. What is true? So he's wondering, how do we know? Especially at 22. So what is true when you're young? But I guess I'm what I feel, see, and hear. True. I'm writing, what is true is he feels, sees, hears. My handwriting is really bad, you guys. I apologize. So he's wondering what's true. especially when you're young. And then I wrote, what is true is he feels, sees, and hears. So what he's experienced, like, you know, what he feels, what he sees, what he hears in the world is what's true, is what he's saying. And then he says, Harlem, I hear you. And so what do we know about Harlem at this point? All we really know is that's where he lives. But Harlem might represent something. And I would say the Black voice. Harlem would probably represent, and this is a guess here. I just know Harlem typically represents, like culturally, where a large African American population lives, and culturally, that's where a lot of like Black culture renaissance has happened in Harlem. So I would say Harlem represents a Black voice. And so for contrast, what would New York be? I hear you too, New York. Harlem is in New York City, I think, and it's part of the city, but it's just one area. So if Harlem is the Black voice and we're dealing with black and white with contrast, this is probably the white voice. So here's a contrast that's happened here. I don't know that we've had any major contrasts yet, not until here. And so that might signal that we have a shift coming. If we're going to, maybe, and I don't know. That's a contrast. I'm going to write contrast. So then we've got this stanza. This is a long stanza. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15 lines. I bet there's going to be a shift in here. So he says, well, I like to eat, sleep, drink, and be in love. I like to work, read, learn, and understand life. I like a pipe for a Christmas present, or records, Bessie, Bop, or Bach. I guess being colored doesn't make me not like the same things other folks like who are other races. So this is its own little change here, right? This is what he likes. So this right here, this is all what he likes. Then it says, I guess being colored doesn't make me not like the same things other folks like who are other races. So we want to interpret this line. Like, what is that? What is he really saying here? So we'll say different races can still like the same things. And so then he goes back to this questioning a little bit. So will my page be colored that I write? Now, does he literally mean colored as in a blue piece of paper? No, he's talking about race here. And I'm just going to write that down so you don't miss it. So will my page be colored that I write? He's talking about the page he's supposed to write for his theme for English B. Being me, it will not be white, but it will be a part of you, instructor. You are white, yet a part of me as I am a part of you. That's American. So this whole section here is different than the first section. The first section is very surface, very much like just kind of shallow, not shallow, but just like what we see on the outside. Oh, here are the things I like. And then just because I'm black doesn't mean I don't like the same things as white people, but that doesn't make me white. And so then it shifts. There's a change here. And this is a good question. Like, will my page be colored that I write? And so a way to say that in a different way would be, can you see his race through his writing? which is really an interesting question. And let's write that down. Can you see race in someone's writing? And then it says, being me, it will not be white. He's talking about his page. And that's because he's Black, he feels like there's never a time he could ever be perceived as white. But he says, but it will be a part of you, instructor. And you are white, which is an interesting way to think about writing, right? That what you read becomes a part of you. And so it's interesting to me for him to say that what I write as a Black man will be a part of you, white instructor. He says, yet a part of me as I am a part of you. And so there's this exchange. And he says that that's American. So what he's saying here, so what I'm writing is, with writing, you take on some part of the writer. That's kind of what he's saying here. Right? I mean, that seems a simple way of saying what he's saying. And obviously he's going to be saying, he's saying something more here, but we're just trying to get the overall. He says, that's American. And then he says, sometimes perhaps you don't want to be a part of me, nor do I often want to be a part of you. And so this is the race divide. Okay, last stanza. But we are. And it's like, what did he just say? Sometimes perhaps you don't want to be a part of me, nor do I want to be a part of you, but we are. That's true. So he's saying we are part of each other. And then he tells us how. As I learn from you, I guess you learn from me, although you're older and white and somewhat more free. This is my page for English B. So he's saying we're part of each other. So why? Why are we a part of each other? And to me, it stands out in this line here. When we learn from each other, we create a connection. Sorry. So we are a part of each other, and when we learn from each other, we create that connection. And then his last little thoughts, though, are that this happens even though you're older and you're white and somewhat more free. This is my page for English B. And this makes me think, so it must be true, right? Because the very beginning said, go home and write a page tonight and let that page come out of you, then it will be true. So if it came out of his heart, then it's true. Okay. So overall, the main issue here is white versus Black, not issue, but contrast. And it takes him this first, second, it's not until we get into the third stanza really that the contrast happens, that we notice the contrast, that we should notice the contrast, I should say. And we're talking about the Black experience versus the white experience. And then he's also talking about this philosophical kind of perspective of, are we really separate peoples, like separate peoples because of our race? He's kind of questioning that. And so he's going on about, where does race really end? When we're reading each other's work, does race matter? I don't know. I don't have an answer for him. But ultimately, the end, this is contrast. So this is not questioning. So I would say all of the first of the poem is more questioning and sort of wondering. And now he's not really questioning. He's come up with his idea. But we are. That's true. We are a part of each other. As I learned from you, I guess you learned from me. And he's probably saying guess because he's not that man. Although you're older and white and somewhat more free. This is my page for English B. So I would say there's two main contrasts. One is ideas, the idea contrast, which would be the white perspective versus the black. And then the second contrast is really the first 1, 2, 3, 4 stanzas versus the last stanza, which would be the tone. The tone is different. That's the contrast. Okay, so we went through and we sectioned off the poem. We broke it down by we read it, then section by section tried to find the main ideas of what was going on. And yes, we can go through section by section and look at what's the relationship, what's the link between what just happened and what's happening now. And we can do that. And I don't want to do that right now just for the sake of time. But ultimately, by the end here, going through, breaking it up, trying to see what's going on, I'm able to see that there's two contrasts kind of going on. And not every poem is going to be like this. I picked this one specifically because one of the contrasts should be really obvious. The idea of the white perspective versus the black perspective. And then if we look structurally, the first 4 stanzas is not separate, but it's different than the last stanza. And then I have identified that the contrast is in the tone. The tone is different in the first 4 stanzas and then from the last stanza. So by looking at these contrasts, and the white versus the black perspective is a big deal. Like that's a big contrast. We want to figure out, okay, what is he really trying to say here? If he is contrasting the white perspective and the black perspective, like what is his purpose? What is he revealing to us by putting his experience side by side with like his teacher? So I would go back and say, I like this line. I guess being colored doesn't make me not like the same things other folks like who are other races. So will my page be colored that I write? Being me, it won't be white, but it will be a part of you, instructor. You are white, yet a part of me as I am a part of you. That's American. Sometimes perhaps you don't want to be a part of me, nor do I often want to be part of you. But we are. That's true. As I learned from you, I guess you learned from me. Although you're older and white and somewhat more free. So when I'm looking at this contrast between him and his teachers, between him and black and being black and his instructor being white, setting those things side by side, to me, right now, it looks like, so what is Hughes saying through contrasts? Okay, that's the question I'm thinking of right now. How does identifying these contrasts help us understand what he's saying? And I think through contrasting the white versus the black, that I think he is saying that maybe underneath race, like, I mean, I'm talking like underneath the surface of the skin. I guess I could say people have things in common despite race. I think with the contrast, he's also saying American, because he says here, that's American, is being part of each other. And then at the end here, he's no longer questioning. That contrast between questioning and not questioning. And that makes me wonder, why is he no longer questioning? He's no longer questioning because he has found the truth. Or we could say his answers. So we can take this and then step back and say, okay, well, what is he saying about race here? What's he saying about life? What's he saying about humanity? What's he saying about anything? But the point is that we were trying to break up the poem into its structural parts, break it down into its ideas. And the next step, we could look at the relationship between ideas to see how an idea is developed, like how it's dealt with. But instead, we wanted to identify specifically the contrasts, and I found 2 here. And are there more? Perhaps. This is just what I focused on. And then, based on those 2 contrasts, what is Hughes really saying about some theme for life? And so, did I identify what is he exactly saying? No, I haven't landed on just one thing, but I found a few things that he seems to be saying. The next step, sorry, my allergies are bothering me. The next step from here would be, okay, I've done all this brainstorming on contrasts, dealt with some structure. And if I was going to do a writing about it, I would have to decide out of all this, like, what is one thing? What's the main idea of the whole poem? And then you can use this kind of stuff as text evidence, like the contrast or structuring things this way or that way. And you would use that as text evidence to prove your point. And that's literary argumentation, which we'll get to. But I really just wanted to walk through what it sounds like, the thinking, to get to finding those contrasts. And it feels like a long process, but the more you do it, the quicker it gets. So I'm gonna stop it here, and I'm gonna stop the recording wherever it is.